Hello everyone, this is part 35 of What If Naruto was in Anbu at 6, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Temari listened to the gentle caress of the ocean's waves against the bleach white sand that covered the beach, the outline left behind clearly marking the tide's limited reach. The crisp ocean air caught her wild and untamed hair, rustling it slightly as gray, near silver-colored eyes looked out to the horizon, her knees hugged tightly to her sea, a few wisps of the sun's bright rays seeping through the shade of the palm trees that leaned over her. She had woken up this morning late, near midday if she had to guess. Her body, still weak from its previous injuries and exhausted over the late night's events, had needed the rest, and apparently even the infamous Devil King had recognized such and had allowed her to indulge in the extra hours of sleep. He'd indulged her so well that when she woke up the ninja was nowhere to be found, only a smoldering fire pit in the center of the cave, several supplies and equipment. Whether his or Hinata's she had no idea, nor did it really make a difference. And of course the last ornament in the cave was the sick Hyuga herself. Temari had to gasp at the Hyuga's features. She hadn't seen Hinata at all and only received a few clipped, measured responses from Naruto as to what was wrong with the unconscious Hyuga when he had carried them both back to the island. Her normally porcelain skin, a faint hue of healthy pink, was now a sickly pale, blue veins actually visible beneath the ghostly F. Her hair, normally a luminous sheet of black that shined with even the faintest light, was now dim, wet with sweat and matted down onto her forehead. The bed she had been laying on, made with a mixture of dry and green leaves, grass and twigs, no doubt made by Naruto, was cold and did little to improve her condition. But considering the lack of resources, there was nothing that could really be done. When she had finally gathered herself enough, noting that her clothing was still with her, she had left the cave, placing a few pieces of dry tinder into the fire pit to keep it burning strong while she went to get some fresh air. Now, several hours later, she sat just beyond the mouth of the cave, at the gnarled, root-lined beach border, the rotting remnants of wood and palm tree skins littered around her. She was really more shell-shocked than anything, here, stuck on this island with now nothing more than her previous jail-keeper, and worse yet, her jail-keeper's boss. Everything just seemed like a blur. One second she was standing across from Gaara. The next, everything had gone to hell and she was here. Where had it all gone? Her freedom was right there. It had been so close she could almost taste it, almost feel the blazing, warm, wonderfully inviting heat of Suna on her face again. She sighed, the sound, miserable, laced with exhaustion, as she let her forehead fall and rest against her knees. Why me? She knew why her. She knew it very well. Because she was the sister of the Kazekage. Because she was Sabaku no Temari, Wind Master of Suna. Because she was the one thing that the cage of Konoha could wield that would force her brother to submit without a fight. He wanted Suna's surrender, he wanted Suna under his rule. He would get it one way or the other. The fact that Zhu Liang had given him tinder to stoke her incentive to actually consider cooperating was merely a bonus in his eyes, nothing more. A shadow suddenly fell over her, and the crunch of sand under a boot became apparent to her ears. Bringing her gaze upward to the silhouette of Naruto, the sun overhead shining in her eyes so she couldn't get a good look at his face. She caught a glimpse of his hair, wild and untamed as it swayed in the breeze, indicating his hood was off before she adjusted her position beneath him, placing herself so his head see off the sun's harsh glare, allowing her to see that he still had the metallic face mask covering the lower half of his face. The imposing, dreaded visage he normally wore, the one he used to terrorize any that stood in his shadow, severely diminished at the sight of bare skin, blue eyes and blonde hair. A rumble sounded above the two and Temari brought her eyes up, eastward, where she saw a thick, black cloud looming over the mountainside, thunder rumbling as lightning flashed through the moisture that made up the clouds. I would suggest, daughter of Suna, came his flat voice as he turned towards the cave, his strides easily swallowing up the distance between himself and the temporary shelter. That you come inside lest I am forced to deal with two deathly ill Konoiki while I'm on this island. She turned back to look at him, noticing only now the three bird carcasses held firmly in his grip. Their heads dangling. I'm surprised. She suddenly called after him, making him pause at the mouth of the cave. You don't have me shackled to your wrist. And you're letting me walk around without an escort. My god, the world's coming to an end. You need no escort here, daughter of Suna. He replied, looking over his shoulder to meet her gaze with his own. This island is only a few dozen miles wide. My clones are spread throughout. And believe me, they will see any help that by some miracle may come for you long before you do. You are trapped here. His words spoken, Naruto turned away from her, the swoosh of his robe away as he entered the wind-shielded cave. Temari sighed pitifully again, her shoulders slumping before she picked herself up, wiping away the sand on her backside before she forced herself to march back into the inky shadows of the cave. As she made her way into the cave behind the blonde, she saw him set down his cave for the day, drawing a kunai to see them up as he began pulling out the feathers. Temari made her way to the side of the cave, the same side she'd been sleeping at earlier. Well, this spot was as good as any, really. She curled up, hugging her knees as a cold draft made her shiver. She noticed Hinata shiver as well, and watching the cage of Konoha stop mid-yank, she knew he had seen the same. He set the half-feathered carcass down, surprising her as he walked over to the Hyuga. Kneeling at her side, he undid the clasp of his cloak, allowing the red material to ripple for a moment on the floor before he grasped it with a firm hand and placed it over the Hyuga, hoping the extra layer would work well enough to shield her from the cold now seeping in through the open end of the cave. His task finished, he turned away from her, knocking a few more twigs into the fire to make it larger before he turned back to the birds. Temari's eyes widened just a little at the sight of him without that cloak, surprised by how much less imposing he looked. She had always seen him with it, or at the very least the white cage robes, which in itself made him seem much more broad-shouldered than he looked right now. He was surprisingly slim, nothing at all like the legendary Demon King. No wonder he wore it to battle. The Suna female had to wonder with that thought if there was any damn aspect of this man's life that didn't revolve around war and death. Naruto knelt down once again next to the birds, continuing to yank out the feathers dutifully. Temari watched him, trying to think of some subject of conversation that wouldn't get her larynx crushed. Surprisingly though, it was not her but Naruto who broke the silence. You have something on your mind, Sabaku. Though it was toned as a question, she knew it was an observation. The deep baritone only enhanced by the mask he still wore, bringing her attention straight back up to him. Finally registering the question, she slowly shook her head. Not really, she said before chuckling, the sound dry and lacking humor. Just trying to find a way to start a conversation with possibly the worst conversationalist in the country. Naruto, not pausing from his task, set aside one bird and began a similar process on the second. And what is it you would like to talk about, princess? She rolled her eyes, shoulders shrugging with an irritated air. How the hell should I know? Naruto raised an eyebrow. You are the one desiring conversation, are you not? Yes, it's just she groaned, eyes closing in irritation as she rubbed her temples. What the hell am I going to talk about with you of all people? Not gonna tell you anything about my past, God knows you're not above using it against me or Gaara. And you're certainly not going to tell me anything about yours. The war is the last thing I wanna go into right now, but it's probably the one thing you can discuss civilly with another human being. Her tirade finished, Temari breathed heavily through her nostrils, glaring at the apathetic Naruto, who seemed to actually shrug before turning away from her and bringing his attention down to the third bird where he began to yank out its feathers as well. She sighed as she lowered her head again. Several bleak, oppressive moments, filled with nothing but the faint sound of rain and the crackle of fire to echo around them. Finally, she broke the silence again as Naruto skewered the three birds onto a wooden stake, putting them over the fire. Will you at least tell me what you'll do if you win? If I win? Naruto questioned, a hint of incredulousness in his tone, never turning his eyes away from the task at hand. By now, Hitaki's forces are marching onto Kumo's doorstep, the main Kumo force, and your brother's reinforcement, still out at sea, too far to affect the outcome of the battle. With Kumo defeated, only Suna will remain. And as we've seen, your brother is willing to surrender for your sake. Temari's lips curled back in a quiet snarl, hating how certain of his victory he sounded. Well, what will you do then? When you win? She stated, drawing out the when in an obviously sarcastic manner. What are your plans for after the war? The lands must be kept in order. Governors and overseers will report directly to me. Rebellions and dissenters will be put down and silenced. Order and peace will be maintained once it has been properly established. Order and peace, she questioned with disbelief before snorting. With all the bee on your hands to think you have the arrogance to talk of peace. You oppress people until any shred of self-thought and resistance is drained from them. That's what you would do. And that, he responded, is enough for me. Temari could only stare with a slack jaw and wide eyes, shaking her head slowly as she closed her eyes. This, just how callous could one man be? A shuffle to the side brought both their attentions towards the lone Hyuga, her shivering intensifying enough to make the heavy cloak visibly shake with her movements. Naruto stood from his spot again, dutifully making his way closer to the Hyuga, his sharp hearing catching the sound of her slightly more accelerated heartbeat. He knew she was awake before he even got there. Temari watched as he knelt at the woman's side, his black-clad form obscuring her upper body from view, allowing her to look only upon the crown of raven black hair. She would have moved from her spot, but she doubted the Hyuga, if she was even awake, would want to see her. Naruto's clawed gauntlets gripped Hinata's chin firmly, moving her face so that she would see him when she opened her eyes. Hinata, he called, his deep voice resonating in the disoriented Hyuga's ears. When her eyes opened, Naruto could actually feel himself stiffen. The normal pale lavender was now lined with dark, sickly-looking blue veins. Was the poison going to affect her eyes? Eyesight was everything to a Hyuga. Would she be able to manage without it? Would she lose her position as clan head? His thoughts on this new development was short as her voice, weak and raspy, reached his ears. Naruto Sama. I'm sorry. Tima. Naruto, realizing what she wanted to say, quickly moved to interrupt her. Sabaku is fine, he stated, shuffling his position a bit more to the side, allowing the Hyuga girl to catch sight of his fellow blonde. Not knowing what else to do, the Suna ninja quickly spoke up, her tone hurried and somewhat uncertain. Yay, I'm fine. Naruto nodded. You have done your duty well, Hinata. You need no longer exhaust yourself. Rest for now. Recover your strength, he said slowly, nodding gently at the Hyuga beneath him. Temari stared at the scene with something akin to wide-eyed disbelief. No correction, it was wide-eyed disbelief. Was he comforting her? Hinata's lids grew heavy, the shivers that raked her body not relenting in the slightest. But there was nothing he could do to change the temperature, and he did not know how this poison would react to the proximity of Kyuubi's chakra. Or even if her weakened body could fight away the toxic effect of the chakra. The warmth it could provide was far too risky considering the gain. He could only hope she was strong enough to at least weather this cold out. Tomorrow morning he could begin to work out a proper wind barricade at the mouth of the cave. He began to stand, ready to move away from the Hyuga so he could move the birds over the fire when Hinata's hand shot forward, grasping his arm in a feeble grip, but strong enough to give him pause as he looked back at the Hyuga. The Hyuga gasped, her mouth opening and closing for several seconds as if the words were in her tea before they could reach her lips. Temari watched the strange scene unfold before her eyes, feeling as though she were intruding, which she probably was. Hinata's eyes glimmered with something akin to shame, breaking away from Naruto's searching gaze. Hinata, he questioned, the chilling edge of his voice, provided by the mask, not making her next request any easier. Could you just stay until I fall asleep again? The Hyuga's face scrunched up with embarrassment at her vulnerability. At her weakness. She hadn't gotten sick in so long, and the last time she had gotten sick, Hanabi and Shino had mothered her so much she didn't even want their comfort anymore. But, here, in this cold, dank cave, with this miserable feeling of weak muscles and twisted insides, she realized just how much they helped her and how much that help meant to her. Naruto, for the first time in several years, was caught completely flat-footed, and his expression, shielded by his mask, was only minimally less extreme than Temari's slack-jawed one. The Sabaku, for her part, couldn't believe what had just reached her ears. And she openly stared at the two, eyes locked onto the blonde-haired ninja's kneeling form. Dear Lord, what would he do? If even half the stories about him were true, then he would K her on the spot for even having the audacity to entertain the thought that he would actually stay there and cuddle with her. What would he even do? Naruto's eyes seemed to narrow, looking down on Hinata's head as she pointedly avoided his gaze, the ice pick seeming to straight through her. Why? He questioned, his eyebrows slowly raising. Hinata seemed to open her mouth to speak before weakly shaking her head. No. Never mind, it was just the poison talking. Naruto nodded, standing from his previous location and walking back to the fire. Temari's eyes on him the whole way, half relieved he didn't kill the Hyuga, and half disgusted with how he so callously brushed off the Hyuga's plea. The fire crackled merrily in the center of the cave between the three, its orange glow making the shadows quiver at the edges of its reach. Temari watched Hinata carefully, observing as the Hyuga's eyes closed and her breathing evened out with shuddering gasps. Falling into a fitful sleep, she turned her blazing eyes onto Naruto, watching as he lifted the birds from their place above the fire, examining them. "You're a cold bastard, ya know that," she muttered, more to herself than anything. But the echo of the cave did nothing to shield her voice from him. Naruto paused before looking at her. "What are you babbling about now?" Temari shook her head, disgust at his actions rolling off her in waves. "You treat your own offices like trash and you expect the world to just fall in line at your word. Yay. That's gonna last a long time." Naruto looked back to the fitfully sleeping Hinata, watching the gentle rise and fall of her sea as she took in shaky breaths. "She is fine," he stated simply. "I do not know what stems your anger, Sabaku." "You don't know?" she questioned before gesturing towards the sleeping Hyuga. "Yushin, all the time I've seen Hinata, this is the one moment I can say little Miss Tough as Nails has shown any kind of vulnerability, and you just brush her off like she's just some brat who's just whining because her thumb hurts. Her emotional state will pass. And she will come to her senses soon enough. A physical comfort is not only unnecessary, it would also delay me from getting other things done to finish securing this cave so as to ensure her survival." Temari shook her head. "Haven't you ever been sick? Don't you remember that helpless feeling of just vulnerability that made you want your mom, dad, or anyone to just be in the same room with you? Because of the Kyuubi's chakra within me, I have never been ill. So these feelings you describe are unknown to me," Naruto stated simply, eyes blinking open and closed with a languid, lazy air about them as he stared at her. The Sabaku stood from her place at the side of the cave with an angry air about her, staring at him with such contempt it rivaled the expression his sister had worn upon their meeting when he assaulted Kumo. "Whatever," she scoffed before making her way closer towards the Hyuga and kneeling at her side, brushing a stray strand of hair away from her face and grasping the pale, sweating hand in her own. Though Temari reminded herself that they were enemies, and that if the Hyuga did hear it was a one-up for her brother and her, she also had to remind herself that if Hinata did it'd just be her and the sociopathic nightmare with delusions of grandeur and world conquest. So yay, it'd be best to help the Hyuga stay alive. Naruto seemed to pause, watching the Sabaku as she knelt at Hinata's side, curiosity, an emotion not often seen, shining behind his bright blue orbs. Interesting. He couldn't help but think before he set the birds down over the fire again. Shifting his position, he brought up his left gauntlet, undoing the clasps that held it tight to his wrist and forearm before pulling it free, setting the metal armor down with a soft thump and the clocking of metal joints reaching their limit as the fingers fell and bent limply. The sound brought Temari's eyes back to him, watching as he did a similar process with his right hand. Only difference is, that when the clasps were undone on his right hand, a virtual stream of B was released, trailing down his arm and dripping onto the cold stone floor of the cavern, and Temari had to gasp at the sight. Naruto ignored the sound though, pulling away the gauntlet, revealing a hand that was covered from wrist to fingertips in horrible burns, several areas of it charred black while others had burnt all the way down to the bone, the stark white a sharp contrast to the glaring red and sickening black. Good God, the pain, it must be excruciating, and he had worked with that hand all day. "What the hell happened to you?" she nearly shrieked, the high pitch of her tone resonating through the cave. Naruto paused, looking back at her before he turned his eyes back onto the hand, a kunai being drawn by his left. "In the battle 2 days ago, your brother transformed into the Shuku. In order to defeat him I had to use a combination of the Rasengan and fire elemental chakra. The largest I've used to date. The resulting damage was thus burning away my hand and breaking most of my arm. I was able to control its movements with a thin layer of chakra so as to dull the pain and maintain the illusion that I was uninjured. But God, what the hell, you just kept on using this hand like that. The pain is manageable," He responded, and Temari nearly retched as the man suddenly slid the kunai over his hand, literally scraping off the rotten and burnt skin. A shudder passed up and down her spine, making her shiver and twitch with disgust. She'd seen some pretty messed up things, but the sound of that kunai scraping off that skin, and worse yet, scraping bone, was enough to make her sick to her stomach. Don't. She paused, swallowing so as to compose herself. Don't you have healing or something that manages that? Naruto nodded. Yes, but it cannot replace or reanimate S tissue, and so I need to take it off myself. He paused before looking back to her. And do not think that your false concern will grant you any sympathy from me should you attempt anything once we reach the mainland. Sabaku. Temari sputtered in indignation, her face growing red with anger. Never mind the fact that in a few more hours she would have possibly deduced such a plan herself. But the fact that he had suggested that now, when she felt nothing but morbid curiosity and even a tiny bit of sympathy for the guy, was enough to make her hackles rise. Well, his hand could rot for all she cared now. Several minutes into the process, however, it soon became apparent that ignoring him was a task easier said than done, especially when the only sound in that cave was his kunai scraping over his skin like he was scaling a fish. It became apparent very soon that the extent of his medical expertise extended no further than this grim self-mutilation display. Apparently all he was gonna do was see himself free of the S tissue and leave the rest to be fixed by the red chakra. No doubt what he had done the other day as well. If he had used proper medicinal techniques, then it may have already been healed. So, she swallowed again. How long should it take to heal? Considering the extent of the damage, 1 or 2 more days. 1 or 2 more. Standing up, Temari marched right up to him, bringing Naruto's attention towards her. She never noticed his free hand tighten on the kunai before she knelt at his side. There was no way that she was gonna listen to that grisly orchestra again 2 more times. Quickly grasping the cloth of his sleeve, she pulled the appendage towards her. Naruto watched, incredulous as she looked at the nearby bag, sifting through it where she found some bandages and healing balm, along with a small vial of alcohol disinfectant. She pulled out the alcohol first, eyeing him warily as he merely looked back at her with an air of indifference, not saying a word. This was an unnecessary act, really. But the Sabaku was agitated, and allowing her to see this moment of vulnerability may allow him to more easily pry information from her in the future. She'd been right. He wasn't above using her past against her. The alcohol spilt over raw skin, white foamy bubbles hissing angrily throughout his entire hand like acid before S away. Temari could only imagine how much that hurt. But his face never even twitched, though that could be related to the mask still on his face. The balm came next as she took some in her own hands and gently rubbed it over his. Naruto ignored the slightly cool sensation, a stark contrast to the previous sting before Temari slowly began the process of bandaging his hand and individual digits. Nearly an hour later, the Sabaku sighed as she finished tying up the end of the bandage. Done. Opening his eyes, the blonde flexed his fingers, spreading them out before tightening them into a fist. Adequate, he remarked before standing slowly and making his way, once again towards the exit of the cave. You'll be welcome, the Sabaku muttered to herself as she went back to Hinata, having enough sense to pull away the roasted chickens from the fire, lest they burn. She could only pray that somebody would show up soon. Otherwise she may be accused of being the only person crazy enough to attack the Devil King in a completely one-on-one fight. Naruto's eyes slowly opened with something akin to a languid air, clear crystal blues meeting the coal-black ceiling of the cave above, a niche of hardened stone and dirt cradling his body. His gaze turned to look between the stalagmites that slightly obscured his vision, finding Temari and Hinata still nestled near the fire. Hinata, shivering from her illness and still quite weak, looked no better than she did yesterday. In fact, the cold of the night seemed to worsen her condition. Naruto's eyes narrowed. Standing up, he clasped his discarded pieces of armor on once again, donning his gauntlets and mask as he made his way closer to the sleeping women, his steps silent, barely causing even the air to stir, it would seem. He knelt at the Hyuga's side, first eye scanning her sickly pale skin before he pulled away the warmth that was his cloak, watching her shudder with startling force and feeling just how cold the cloak was, wet from her sweat. Her eyes moved rapidly behind her lids, but it wasn't REM. It seemed to be more erratic twitches more than anything. Just what was this poison doing to her? Bringing his hand forward, he lightly tapped her face. Hinata, he called, his grating, deep voice seemingly vibrating through her sea. The Hyuga groaned in something akin to pain before he tapped her face again, a bit more forcefully this time. Watching as her vein-lined eyes opened to look upon him, the cage nodded. Do you remember your name? She looked at him strangely for a moment before she answered. Hinata Hyuga, she said, clearly expressing in her half-asleep tone just how ridiculous she thought the question was. Do you remember who I am? He questioned. Though indeed this line of questioning seemed mundane and unnecessary, he had no idea how this poison was affecting her. And twitching is a neurological symptom. If it was affecting her mind, it may be affecting her memories or even her simplistic motor functions. Naruto-sama, she answered, her eyes drooping slightly as sleep threatened to take her again. Naruto nodded, deciding that was enough for now, allowing her to sleep before he stood, marching around her to get to the sabaku. Kneeling at her side this time, he easily noticed that she too was shivering, goosebumps traveling over her skin, and he could actually begin to see the hint of blue tinging her lips. Not that he blamed her, with only a fire and little to no other protection against the cold other than the clothes on her back, it was no wonder. Placing one hand to hover over her body, red chakra began to seep from his claws, the mist-like fog descending over the sabaku like a blanket. The heat it gave off was not unlike the fire, enveloping the blonde woman, whose shivers almost immediately ceased, a contented sigh escaping her lips. It would not do to have her of hypothermia in this cave. Suddenly, however, she groaned, her features curling up in pain as her hands clutched herself, moving lower towards her stomach. Naruto, realizing what was happening, pulled the chakra away, allowing it to fade into nothing, but it was already too late. Temari's eyes snapped open and sudden heaving. Dry coughs escaped her lips. Naruto placed his hand on her shoulder, using a quick shunshin to vanish from the cave, reappearing outside. The sensation of the technique, coupled with the sudden, blinding white in this bout of sickness, did nothing to help, and she was soon rolled over, on her hands and knees, vomiting the poultry she consumed the other day. Naruto watched her, resting on one knee, hand slung casually over the higher leg as he watched her begin to recover from the chakra-induced sickness. Cough wheeze. Sensing rather easily that her question would take a great deal of time to get out of her lips in her current state, he spoke. I apologize, he drawled. It appears humans are less tolerant of the Ninetales chakra than what I previously thought. Temari coughed and wheezed for nearly a full minute as she tried to recover her breath. What the hell were you trying to do? See how fast you could make a sleeping woman vomit. Congratulations, you hold the F record. Anger and sarcasm was almost palpable in her tone as she glared at him, sighting down as she panted for breath, lips curling at the taste of vomit in her mouth. And she thought morning breath was bad. Oh god, this was gonna be a horrible day. You were cold, he answered simply. The first stages of hypothermia were beginning to set in. And the heat of the day would not reach us for at least another hour or two, risking further damage. So you decided that churning my stomach and making me throw up was a better option. No, Naruto replied calmly, seemingly uncaring to her anger. As I said, your human physiology is far more vulnerable to the toxic feel of the Ninetales chakra than I previously anticipated. And my attempts at using the unnatural heat of the Ninetales chakra to stave off the hypothermia resulted in this after a brief overexposure. Yay, Temari replied, her voice uncertain as she truthfully didn't know how to respond to the relatively kind act. At least by his standards. Well, next time wake me first and don't shower me in the stuff for 20 minutes or whatever time you did it. I'm sure just 1 or 2 minutes would be enough. I channeled chakra over your body for 17 seconds, Sabaku. Now that gave her great pause, to say the least. She was the sister to a Jinchuriki herself, and so she knew that demonic chakra was toxic to humans, obviously varying from each Bayu, and though Kyuubi's was reported to be one of the most poisonous, 17 seconds was unbelievable. The few times Gaara had ever lost control or let it slip and his chakra had been around her, it had taken at 10 minutes for her to feel queasy. How can your body be so used to that stuff? She questioned, looking at him from the corner of her eye. If 17 seconds was enough to get her to throw up, then what could channeling's the stuff do to him? Obviously his body was more adapted to the chakra, but it had to do something. Naruto stared at her for a brief moment before he responded. It's not. The village of Kumo, its buildings still spewing black smoke as embers still clung to life, blackened, charred wood and soot-covered brick making the once pristine white village look like scarred broken ruins rather than the thriving metropolis it was only hours ago. He lined the streets, red bee staining the cobblestones in a sickening macabre display. The Konoha ninja that now left this desolate and broken place paid these bee no mind. Callously marching past them leaving the city with a single lone Anbu squad to guard the place, remaining hidden in case any survivors emerged, or more likely than not, returned. Kumo would not rise again from this defeat, Kakashi would be sure of it. The copy ninja made his way at the head of the column. Behind him, several ninja, ranging from Junin to Chunin carried their fallen comrades in massive stretcher-like lifts, 4 on each corner. Any squad that was willing to carry their comrade was allowed to. Normally this was not done, but with their final enemy being sooner they were far too deep in fire country to have an attack. And no remnant force of Kumo that may be hiding near the city would attack a column of over 1,000 ninja unless they wanted to. The copy ninja turned his head to look over his shoulder, finding Tayuya, Sakanaute Fukin, Kidomaru and Jirabu carrying Kimimaro's unmoving form. The Kaguya was paler than usual, his body stiff and the wounds of his battle unhealed only adding to the gruesome display. Kakashi allowed his mind to wander. Suna was their final target but just because they could focus all their attention and resources on it, that did not mean victory was assured. Suna was the only shinobi nation that could boast that no invasion force had ever marched upon the gates of its village. Even if one would be able to secure a stable water supply and weather the blistering heat and disorienting dunes, the patrols that marched across the sea of sand were loaded with puppeteers, an artistry of ninjutsu that held enough of an advantage in the desert that entire squads of enemy ninja had fallen to only one team of puppeteers, hidden among the sands. Then, even if all that were to be thrown aside or crushed beneath the boot of their war machine, there was one final, possibly insurmountable obstacle. The Kazekage. If with only a single relatively small stretch of sand here in Kumo he had buried nearly an entire sector of the village, what could he do in the desert? He'd crushed the entire army before it was even 100 meters from the walls. Not to mention that Zhuge Liang escaped. The sleeping dragon's strategies would only add to Suna's defenses. Or would it? The Raikage had practically keeled over during that fight of theirs. He may have failed to KO him physically but the man was definitely ill. Maybe he would on the trip to Suna. Now that would be a favorable outcome. Knowing their luck however it'd be unlikely. Kakashi sighed. Zhuge Liang, even with the edge Gaara's abilities gave them was still in the eyes of many the backbone of the resistance. He should have been faster. He shouldn't have hesitated when Liang's illness crippled him during the fight. He should have done something. Anything. Though he knew brooding over it wouldn't accomplish anything, he couldn't help it. He knew that losses and casualties were a fact of life in war, but from this point out any strategy that Liang ended up using to counter them, and therefore all the lives that would be lost in those counter-strategies would be on his head, no one else's. The sound of footsteps at his side brought his attention to the right, finding Tayuya there rubbing her shoulder where the wooden platform had been resting. Looking over his shoulder he saw an Anbu had taken her place, possibly to give her a break, no doubt the others would need one soon as well. Looking at her the copy ninja spoke with that similar nonchalant tone, "Got something on your mind do you?" Tayuya closed her eyes. "You're annoying," she stated simply. "Why thank you. You're quite charming yourself." He shot back, eyes returning to his book. They continued to walk, nothing else coming to either of them before Tayuya finally sighed. "So what happens now? You think we're gonna have to fight sooner or are they gonna surrender?" "Surrender?" Kakashi questioned, almost tasting the word as he said it. The concept seemed to roll in his mind, brewing there for a moment before his lips curled in something that seemed almost like a mild distaste. Would they surrender? The concept in itself seemed almost wrong to him. For so many to for so much suffering to come to pass. For everything to just end so abruptly without their final enemy even trying to put up a fight, it seemed just so anticlimactic. Kakashi mentally shook himself. What was he talking about? So much death, it needed to be avoided entirely, but here he was, disappointed at the prospect of it never happening. Had he truly grown so callous? Had he become just as bad as Naruto? He shook the disturbing thoughts from his mind, deciding to answer her question. "No, I don't think they'll surrender. probably fight tooth and nail before they even begin contemplating it. You think so? I mean, they can't really have much left after this. Kumo doesn't have much left after this. Suna has barely wet its feet in the bee. They still have many ninja to throw into the fight before they're done, and I can't think of any place more dangerous for an invasion force. Tayuya watched as Kakashi continued to read, or at least pretend to. His explanation gave her a foreboding feeling in the pit of her stomach. But we've got the Devil King, on our side, and that's got to count for something. She stated, a smirk tugging at her lips. Kakashi's own lips curved upward. Ah yes, now that was one advantage no one could get over. Temari shivered as she dunked herself in the cold stream, her teeth chattering noisily as the cold seeped down into her bones. Why oh why couldn't there be some kind of hot spring in this place? If she was cold last night, she was sure this swim wasn't gonna help. She made the process very quick. Having ground up some herbs and flowers she'd found as makeshift soap, she scrubbed herself with haste before jumping out of the stream and finding her clothes. It was moments like this she would gladly trade her wind element for a fire one. God, she was freezing. Her clothes clung tightly to her body, her shivering increasing with a strong draft. The Sabaku hugged herself as she sat down at the base of a tree, hands rubbing her shoulders as her whole body shook, knees up to her sea as she tried to curl herself into a perfect ball. God, that water was freezing. The fleeting thought that maybe she should go find Naruto and have him do that thing with the chakra again passed to get some heat back into her system passed her mind. It took a moment, but soon enough her mind fully caught up to what had passed through it. And the conversation that had happened only hours ago came rushing back, along with his admission. Or well, statement. Either one fit considering his nonchalant nature. He said his body wasn't used to the Ninetales chakra. What did that even mean really? In every battle she'd ever seen him in, hell even at times outside of battle, he used the chakra, or she felt it at least leaking off of his body in small degrees. Did that mean he was in a kind of constant pain? The 17 seconds she'd been exposed to it had given her nausea that still had her feeling a little queasy. If he had to endure that all day every day. No wonder he was so bitter and angry. She'd be pissed too, that was for sure. Still, that led to another thought. If it hurts him so much, then why would he use it to help her? That thought gave her pause. Even the hypothermia that he claimed was beginning to take her could have been staved off if she was just woken up and taken outside where the sun's rays were already hitting the earth and pushing away the cold of the night. So, why wouldn't he just have done that and instead have hurt himself just so she could sleep some more? Temari shook her head almost violently. Snap out of it, girl. This is probably why he did it, making me pity him or something with that lie that his body isn't used to the chakra. God, I'm such an idiot. Keep in mind who you're dealing with here. Stay focused. With her mind cleared and her body now mildly used to the cold, the Suna Kanoiki stood, rubbing her arms again for good measure before she began making her way back down to the cave where they were residing. When she arrived at the hollowed-out rock formation, the Suna Kanoiki was met at the entrance with something a little different than what she was used to. The entire mouth of the cave had been boarded up with dry leaves, twigs and tinder, a virtual wall of foliage to keep out the cold night air. Temari saw no opening point and so swiftly used a shunshin, reappearing on the other side of the barrier a moment later, eyes scanning the inside of the cave, finding only Hinata present within, the fire still crackling merrily at her side. The Hyuga was groaning in seeming pain, squirming in her makeshift bed. The Sabaku marched forward with quick strides, kneeling at the Hyuga's side. Hey, you alright? The Suna Kanoiki questioned, watching the Hyuga's vein-lined eyes flutter open. NGH. The clan head groaned with a mild shake of her head. So sort of. What does sort of even mean? The Sabaku stated with mild irritation. Hinata's face scrunched up, obvious discomfort and even shame was seen on her face. I need to use the bathroom. Temari's expression would have been comical to the Hyuga if she wasn't in this absolutely humiliating, degrading situation. The clan head was sure her dignity would never recover from this. It was a horrible, dreadful feeling being subject to this. Her legs and arms felt like jelly and she could barely muster the strength to roll onto her side. She was always sleepy or tired, everything just ached. If the Hyuga never got sick again, it'd be too soon. Temari glanced around almost in a panic. She was half tempted to be in her and tell her to just do it there, if only because that was not something she wanted to help in. Unfortunately, her sympathy for the Hyuga's position and the knowledge that the only person other than her that could help, well, let's just say that was one situation the Sabaku wouldn't wish on her worst enemy. That is what even ninja should consider cruel and unusual punishment. Stealing her resolve, the Sabaku slowly knelt down, slinging Hinata's arm over her shoulder. All right, let's just get this over with quick, she said before she used a shunshin to head back out. Meanwhile, hundreds of yards away, Naruto sat on a tree branch, sky blue eyes staring into the horizon, west towards the mainland, almost searching for something. And at the same time, several hundred miles away, another Jinchuriki with blonde hair and blue eyes slowly returned to the world of the living. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.